Favour? We've reopened the meeting. Thank you for your patience with that short adjournment. The officers have proposed that we take out the word "and" in the "and" or of both 3 and 4. For the sake of moving on, that has been accepted by the mover as a semantic change, so we'll just remove those words.
How could it be accepted by the mover and I'm the mover?
No, the amendment. Please take a seat. Thank you, Councillor Amir. So just let me resituate myself. So we have an amendment which has been moved by Councillor Greco, seconded by Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers on the amendment? Sorry. Or, not and, or. Yeah. Okay, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you also to Councillor Greco for bringing these amendments for us to consider. It's really important from my perspective, and I'm speaking in favour of 2, 3 and 4 and against 1 and 5, and I'll do that collectively in the interest of time. I support Councillor Greco's intent in relation to 2, 3 and 4. In relation to retaining the recordings for 4 years, that makes complete sense to me and is a logical addition there. In relation to 3 and 4, my understanding, based on what we've now addressed, is that it reflects the current practice, which means that someone who is non-literate or someone who turns up on the day can ask a question, and that is completely appropriate from my perspective, and I'm pleased that Councillor Greco has put forward those amendments to propose that. In relation to 1 and 5, for similar reasons to Councillor Lasserf, I don't support those, and I don't support those for both the reasons Councillor Lasserf has said, and also because in relation to a notice of motion is not a decision-making tool. It is a means through which it triggers council action. There are significant restrictions, and rightly so, as read out under what a notice of motion can and can't do, and generally it is actually the way to put something either on a future council agenda or to get the organisation to consider it. It is not something which necessarily naturally follows, because it does not have the time and energy of an officer report for that consideration. So I don't support it on that basis. And likewise, in relation to a petition, whilst I appreciate the question or the point that Councillor Greco is raising through that, the current practice actually works quite well, because it does deliver a report generally back to council on the item, and that is the time at which we have submissions in relation to that. So on that basis,
10 seconds.
Support 2, 3 and 4, but I can't support 1 and 5 as listed.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? No. There being none, we'll now move to the vote. We're going to vote on each of these separately, so there will be 5 votes. So in relation to point 1, all those in favour and against? That motion was, or that clause was lost, or that change. In relation to number 2, all those in favour and against? That is carried. In relation to 3, all those in favour and against? That is carried. In relation to 4, all those in favour and against? That is carried. In relation to 5, all those in favour and against? That is lost. Thank you. Those amendments. So amendments 2, 3 and 4 have now become part of the governance local law. We'll continue with debate on the governance local law. We've heard from the mover and the seconder. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
If I may, and if we can get the substantive motion back on screen, which is the one with Councillor Amir's point. I'll just make the point just to support the addition that Councillor Amir has put in there, which is that we actually need, it's really important that Council makes incredibly clear through this local law that it will not allow items to be put on the agenda that are either false or misleading. I think that's what our community would expect. I certainly think that that is what the Local Government Act expects in terms of the way in which we are expected to conduct ourselves. And I would be deeply concerned if we had a false or misleading statement included in a notice of motion or in fact even in an officer's report. And it's incumbent upon us as councillors, if we believe something is incorrect, to bring that to the attention of the organisation. But it's also important that we empower the Chief Executive to actually identify if something is false and misleading, because it can have unintended consequences, both in terms of the public perception of our governance, but also it runs the risk of us adopting things which actually have no basis in truth. So on that basis, really pleased, and I would thank Councillor Amir for her initiative in putting that in the mix, and also to say that having seen several iterations of governance local laws over the last 11 and a half years, this one seems to provide the greatest protections for both transparency and good governance, and that's what our community expects. And I thank the officers for their work, and I hope that the outcomes deliver meetings that are focused, that are fair, that are just, and do not cause staff to have to work late into the hours, because that's also a workplace issue, and we take that very seriously here.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Reddy. From the outset, I'll say that I'll be supporting the new governance rules. Just in relation to some general comments in regards to them, I'm really pleased to see, after many years that we've been requesting, that councillors voting will be finally recorded in the minutes, and I think that's quite appropriate, and because it ensures accountability on the behalf of councillors in relation to what their views or how they voted on particular issues. I think that's important because we are elected representatives, and we are elected on particular mandates, and it's a way for the community to ensure what our work has been on council and what things we have supported and not supported. Having said that, and I think that's quite positive, I think also I'm just a bit perturbed by some of the parts in the governance law which I think really restrict democracy. Some of them went to the amendment that I was trying to put up, where it gave the community a greater opportunity to participate in our debates and to participate in our decision making. I think that ought to be the case. That's what democracy is about, and in order to give people a greater opportunity to have an input where they can. And I think we all always should be alert to that. The other point that I would make, which I'm a bit perturbed about, is that in relation to notices of motion, now notices of motions can only be within the framework of the council plan. I think that's quite limiting. I think that's quite limiting on councillors, but it's not only limiting on councillors, it's limiting on the community that wants a councillor to put forward a particular motion, but if that motion does not fit within a council plan, then that motion, according to these rules, will not be allowed. I think that's a limitation on democracy, both on councillors and on the community.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Williams.
Notice of motions are a big one. In reference to a notice of motion, I usually would do a notice of motion because my constituents or somebody in the community is quite concerned about something. Now, with this new governance laws and rules, that if I decide that I need to do a notice of motion, it has to be sent around to councillors, and councillors have to obviously be discretional whether they decide to accept it or not before it actually goes its next step. I find that
Sorry,
it's...
I'll just correct that, as a statement of correction. It must be distributed to councillors, but councillors won't make any determination about whether it's accepted. The CEO will make that determination.
But I find that if there needs to be any changes or spelling or if it's not, they don't feel it's the correct wording, then they may get a backlash from other councillors prior, and instead they'd rather give it to an officer instead to go over it first. But it seems like that it has to go to councillors to have a look at it first before it goes to any other step.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Lassurf.
Can I just ask a question of clarification brought up by Councillor Williams's comment? Does the proposed local law restrict councillors from working with officers before formally submitting it to make sure that the wording is the best it can be but within the intent of what the councillor is trying to put forward?
Thank you, Mr. Mann.
Through you, Mayor Reddy, no. No, it doesn't.
It doesn't stop them from working with officers?
No, it doesn't.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you for the answer, Mr. Mann. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is passed unanimously, and we might note that that was unanimous in keeping with what the rules will be 2 meetings from now. That brings us to item 8.5, towards an age-friendly Darebin interim report. We'll get the officers up and seek it. So, sorry, Councillor Newton, not yet. Thank you. We've got the officers here in the event that anyone has any questions in relation to item 8.5. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Greco.
Through you, Mayor, if I may ask a question. Yeah. My question is about, it relates to the 2022 deadline by the federal government in regards to the funding. And so my question is that what strategy do we have in place that will enable us to plan for that 2022 date in the event that whether the government continues on with funding, but particularly if the federal government ceases that funding, what strategy do we have in place to continue to provide services to our residents?
Through Mayor Rennie, Councillor, we are all awaiting the results of the Royal Commission into aged care, which I think will really inform the whole system. We are also in regular contact with the funders at a very, very senior level, at officer level, and we're also connected through the MAV and connecting with what other councils and what other sector players are talking about. It's hard to predict what's going to happen by then, but I would be extremely surprised if there's not a similar program in place or that they roll that money over. That would be my very strong prediction.
Thank you, Ms McGrath.
I just had another question, just in relation to are other councils currently registering themselves as home care package providers? If so, which are those councils and how many of them?
Through you, Mayor Rennie. I don't have the numbers at hand. I'm aware there's a small number of councils that manage home care packages, but we could find that out and get back to you.
Thank you. The final question, are there any legal or other obstacles in council becoming a registered home care provider?
No. Oh, sorry, through you, Mayor, no.
Thank you for those questions, Councillor Greco. So, are there any further questions? No. I'd like to ask if there's a motion. Councillor Newton.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Is there a seconder? Councillor Amir, thank you. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So this is something that we've been working on really strongly over the last few years. It's something that the changes from the federal government have been really challenging for our staff and for our wider community. But I think the work that happened through the aged care review was pretty incredible, and I think we've done so much consultation to find out what's really needed. And I think specifically at this time where our older and more vulnerable residents might be in a position where things are getting quite difficult for them with the changing coronavirus situation, I think what's really great is that there's things popping up like the Melbourne Northside coronavirus outreach on social media. We're seeing people support their neighbours. And I think when I think about the age-friendly review, when I think about the work that we've done with the Healthy and Active Ageing Board, it's really about reducing social isolation. It's about making people have the best lives they can in Darebin now and into the future. In terms of some of the things that we've worked on over the last few years, and I really want to credit Shadi, Robin and Kathy and now Kerry for that work that's continuing. We've been looking at social connection and civic participation. I want to particularly highlight that there's been programs like a Men's Shed volunteer program where they've been working with Parade College Year 10. So I really love that idea of getting young people and older people to know each other. There's programs like Get Active in Darebin. We're looking at home safety. We're looking at extending the home library service, building affordable housing over Town Hall Avenue. And I just think that at this point especially, it's so crucial to get this right and look after our senior residents, and I'm looking forward to seeing what work continues.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Amir.
As Councillor Newton mentioned, this is something that's been a strong focus of this council, particularly given the changes from the federal government, and it was really exciting to see the results of the Age-Friendly Darebin review and those recommendations which really covered all elements of life for older people and all of the points where older residents interact with council services. As Councillor Greco has highlighted, there is still some uncertainty in terms of what will be happening next, but it's been great to see that this work has been happening to put us in a good position to make sure that all older people are supported by council, from those who are in the more acute end, as well as older people who are happy and healthy and wanting things like greater accessibility, the arts programming, the health and rec programming, and as Councillor Newton mentioned, opportunities for social connection. There are a few areas of council services where it's not relevant to consider the needs of older residents. And also it's great to see the focus, which is absolutely consistent with the council plan, seeing older residents not just as service users and service recipients, but also residents who have much to give. And I suppose, for example, thinking about the strength of the University of the Third Age community here in Darebin, I keep hearing more and more stories about people who've met people, creating a really strong network across Darebin. So thank you to the team and staff across council for the work in all of these areas. There's still some things where we've got a bit further to go, and as Councillor Newton mentioned, some challenges ahead, but I'm proud to see that we've progressed so much in this space.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Yes, Mayor. I have an amendment that I'd like to move. I've circulated it late this afternoon, so it should come up.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Just get that up on the screen. Councillor Greco, if you can confirm that's the amendment that you intended. So I'll just check that that's what you intended. Thank you for the amendment, Councillor Greco. I'll see if that's accepted by the mover and the seconder.
I'm going to say no to that one.
So that's not accepted. We'll therefore have to seek a seconder. Is there anyone who'd like to second that amendment? Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco? Sure, we have a question from Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. My question is related to whether there has been significant policy or legislative or context, obviously aside from coronavirus, changes that have occurred within the aged care sector since councillors were previously briefed on this issue.
Thank you for the question, Councillor O'Meara. I'll hand to Robin O'Kerry to answer that.
Through Mayor Rennie, the only change which we'll be briefing Council on next Monday night is a change to the assessment service. In fact, what they've done is pulled back and keeping things as they are now. There is already an existing resolution through a NOM on the books for us to come back to do just this in November post the trial that's currently underway.
Thank you, Ms McGrath. So we'll now move to debate on the amendment. Councillor Greco, over to you. Sure, Councillor Lasserf.
Just because of what the response was. If we were to support, not support this amendment, would that negate the NOM that's already passed, or the NOM would hold? It would hold. Okay.
Okay, because the answer to that came in the form of a nod, I'll just say nothing in this amendment would change the, well, if we didn't support this, the NOM that's on the books would be what we work to, which would be for this to come back in November. Councillor Greco, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, just very quickly, I think one of the points of great uncertainty is the issue of what will happen after 2022. We've heard that there's a Royal Commission that creates uncertainty. It could be, it may not be, the rollover of the of councils getting continuing funding to provide services. But given in this uncertainty, I don't think we really can wait until November at the end of this year. And I think that we should start to do some preparatory work now, start doing some thinking around this space in order for us just to look at the feasibility of for us to whether we can become, or what that would mean to become a registered aged care provider. I think it's important that we do that work, and we do that work as quickly as possible in order to give both our community some certainty and also to give the organisation some sort of certainty in terms of which direction that we want to move. Again, it's critical that we do this type of work, and in the time that I've been on the council, I've never seen a situation where we've had uncertainty and where we've just sort of sat on our hands waiting for a report that's going to come to us in 8 months' time. We generally want to sort of get into the thick of it, start exploring things, start looking at things, looking at options. I understand that there's other councils that have become registered home care providers. Let's look at their experience. Let's report back. And why I put the date of August, and I was aware of the November, is that a report will be coming back to us in August. That is the annual report in relation to how we're tracking in regards to this. So I would have thought it would be an appropriate time to get a report to come back together with that report. So it gives us some sort of opportunity to explore and look at and start scoping whether we can move in the direction of providing or being a registered home care provider. Yeah, the other point that I would just make is that I know that this issue is, we've talked about this issue in the past, and I just think, and I'm just appealing to councillors, is that let's do the work, councillors. I'm not saying at this particular point in time, even though I've got a general tendency of I think where the council ought to be going, but I want us to see some of the information. I want us to start to get ourselves versed with the information, because this is going to be a really critical decision, both from a financial perspective, also from a community perspective, in terms of what the community expects from us. So we need to start exploring and getting an evidence-based information so that we're in a better position to make financial decisions, organisational
10
decisions,
seconds.
and most importantly, the best decision for our residents in our city.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
We really need to be prepared. I think that the longer we leave it, the less prepared we are. It's important that we're up to date on whatever information is available so we can come to council and we can make the most appropriate decision. We have a number of staff and a number of people in the community that rely on our staff, and I think it's so more important that we don't leave it to the last minute. NDIS was left like that, where everything was rushed through. I do not want the same process to happen in reference to aged care. The aged care, we're talking about people at our most vulnerable, people who rely on council, who rely on staff that come and help them. They rely on those home care, those deliveries. They need to be reassured months in advance, not last minute. It's important that we continue to work and be in front of new projects and situations like this, because I would hate to feel that we're on the back foot.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers to the amendment? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you also to our officers for all their work on this. And I just wanted to speak against the amendment for a couple of reasons. One is that to receive a report on the nature of which Councillor Greco has suggested, on the cusp of us going into caretaker period, really doesn't leave this council in its current term with the ability to make what would be a significant decision to then proceed with, and also with only half the picture. That's the first reason why I can't support this. We've heard very clearly that there is a piece of work being undertaken that actually lands, and which a report in November is actually well timed to consider this in its entirety. I'd be concerned if, for those who do support this, that you actually end up with a position that is actually not necessarily supportive of where you want to go, because you actually don't have the full picture and you don't actually have the supporting evidence. But if you want to end this concept before the election, then by all means go ahead and get that report. But probably more significantly, I've heard from Councillor Williams about the importance of our staff giving the time and dedication to actually providing and supporting those services that we do have. And I would just remind councillors that the work of our staff, particularly in our aged care team and in our policy team more generally, over the next few months is going to be unlike anything that they have had to do over recent years. We are about to enter a period where members of our community, particularly our older members and those who are vulnerable, could be at significant risk. And I want every minute that they spend at work dedicated to maximising the safety outcomes for those community members, not writing a report with only half an answer. So on that basis, I'm quite happy to wait until November, or in fact for the next council, to wait until November, because that is actually not in our term, for that report to happen, and for the next few months to be spent on supporting our community and our older residents who are vulnerable.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Amir.
Thank you. This is something we've discussed many, many times. Some councillors may remember that early on in the council term, I believe it started in 2016, if not early 2017, there was a councillor working group exploring this very issue and others. So collectively, between all of those meetings that many of us councillors were on, the many, many briefings, we've debated this almost exact motion several times. So I think it's not true to say that we've sat on our hands. We've done, as councillors and officers, hundreds of hours of work around this issue, and that's not even including the more day-to-day work, not even including the very extensive review that was undertaken as part of the Age-Friendly Darebin project, and all of the implementation of recommendations to come out of that. So I think some of the statements that have been made are a misrepresentation of the vast amount of work that has happened. We've heard from the officers...
Could I have a point of order? I object to the point of saying that what I've said has been misrepresentation.
So, Councillor Greco, can I refer you to the governance local law Councillor Greco, in making a point of order, you have to relate it to one of the points of order under section 47 of the Governance Local Law.
Give me a minute.
I think, so this will be, here, I'll pass it round to you, Councillor Greco.
Mayor Reddy, on two grounds, under 47, clause 47 point D, constitutes improper behaviour towards a councillor, and 47E, that it's offensive towards a councillor.
And you're saying that in relation to Councillor Amir's words that there was a misrepresentation. I'm going to rule against the point of order because I don't believe that what Councillor Amir said was either improper or offensive.
I want to move that a dissenting motion against your point of order.
Sure, I'll invite the Deputy Chair to come up.
Councillor Greco, you have 2 minutes to outline your position.
Yeah, Councillor, 'cause I'm really sorry to
Sorry.
do this.
Do we have...
Sorry, we need a seconder for the motion.
Okay. So, do I have a seconder for Councillor Greco's motion of dissent in the chair? Okay, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, look, it's really awkward for me to get up here and put in a motion of dissent in regards to this, but I really object to the statement that what I've said was a misrepresentation. I don't know how it could be a misrepresentation for the fact that, yes, maybe it's been debated in council, but what has not happened and what this motion is trying to do is actually trying to get a report that scopes a feasibility study in regards to this particular matter. So the point that was made by Councillor Amir that hundreds of hours have been spent, I don't see where those hours have been spent in terms of producing a report or producing some modelling. There's been a few hours that have been used here, maybe, in the chamber about debating this particular issue, and it's in its various forms that has come through the chamber. But to suggest that hundreds of hours have been used on this particular, I think that's a misrepresentation of what I've been trying to say. And I'll stop there so I can answer my phone, or hang up on the phone. So if I could just finish. So I think it's sort of really overstating the matter to say that I'm misrepresenting something. I'm genuinely trying to address an issue which I'm quite passionate about, and I find it highly offensive that because I'm very passionate about this issue, that it gets construed as if I'm trying to misrepresent what's taking place in this organisation.
Mayor Reddy, you have 2 minutes.
I think in moving into this kind of the debate, we find ourselves in difficult territory because short of having people's words written down and being able to quote them verbatim, going over exactly what was said is difficult and leads to further debate about exactly what was said. I think it would be fair to say that there was an inference from Councillor Greco's words that this council hadn't adequately considered or time hadn't been spent or that time would be wasted if we didn't get on and do something earlier. On that basis, Councillor Amir talked of a misrepresentation. We could talk about whether misrepresentation is the best language, but Councillor Greco has said that this is improper behaviour and is offensive. And I don't believe it is either. And ultimately, in terms of my ruling on the point of order, I have to go to the local law and say, was this improper? I don't actually think that choice of words was improper given the inference that had been made. I also don't think that the word misrepresentation is offensive in any way, although we could, obviously, and can and are debating the extent to which that's true. So on the basis that what I have to go on when I make a ruling on what is a valid point of order is the local law and the language in the local law, I don't believe anyone could consider that use of the word misrepresentation was improper. And I don't think it is offensive, and that's why I made the ruling that I did.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Councillors, we're now voting on Councillor Greco's motion of dissent in the chair. All those in favour and against? That motion is lost. Councillor Rennie, please resume your seat.
So, Councillor Amir, you were speaking to the amendment. We'll resume that. I believe there was probably about a minute on the clock. Yeah. So we could put a minute on the clock so that Councillor Amir can continue speaking to the amendment. We'll put 2 and I'll stop at 1, that's fine. Councillor Amir.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. As I was saying, there was work done by the officers and councillors together with some consultants working across a number of councillors back from 2016-17, possibly into 2018, and some of that work did include consideration of a range of options, including this one here, whether council would become a registered service provider ourselves or in collaboration with other councils. Since that time, there have been changes in regards to the day-to-day work of council as discussed in this report here. There has also been the extension of the funding, but the fundamentals of how the assumptions that were underlying that original work have not largely changed since that time. We've heard from the officers that we'll be receiving a briefing next week on what has changed. And as was mentioned by Councillor McCarthy, I believe in the current context where it is a very sensitive, vital time, we need to be focusing on work on the ground, not on policy change.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? We'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is lost. We'll now proceed to debate on the motion. We've heard from the mover and the seconder. Are there any further speakers to the motion? There being none, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to the next item, 8.6, Outdoor Sports Infrastructure Framework. We'll just get our officers to come up so that we can ask any questions if we have any. Thanks to the team for being here tonight. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Greco?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I had a couple of questions. I said these questions earlier this afternoon, but I just, in the response that I got, I just want some further clarification. I just want to know whether, through the process of and the weighting that we're giving at the moment, when a project is selected, whether there's an opportunity after that project has been selected to either make it, if you like, in inverted commas, conditional, or to facilitate a process that a bit like we do when we seek co-funding for a project, that we also seek co-assistance from the club in order to promote our other objectives in relation to participation levels of people from non-English speaking background or people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So I'm just wondering whether we need to build that into this existing infrastructure policy, or that it is possibly something that sits outside of the infrastructure policy, and if it does, how can we address it?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Greco. Over to the officers. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Ernie. I think the best, or a potential option for that, is through our licence agreements. So we have, with recent licence agreements, looked at inclusion goals in regards to for clubs to reach as part of that licence agreement when they have had a capital works project either underway or completed.
Just as a follow-up question, I'm aware of the licenses agreements, but the license agreements, from my understanding, their time cycle is different to the time cycle of when we say that we're going to go ahead with a particular refurbishment or redevelopment. So, and I'm fully aware of what happens within the license agreement. I'm asking for something more than that. I'm asking for whether, when we are to approve a redevelopment or an upgrade, that we build into that upgrade or redevelopment a process similar to when we seek co-funding to ensure that the particular targets are met in regards to the underrepresentation of certain residents. I hope that's clear. I'm trying to distinguish it from the light. That's one thing, and I'm happy that we do that, and I'm happy for us to look at that and improve on that. I'm looking for another layer in the process that actually helps us to reinforce this particular idea and concept.
Through you, Marini. Yes, we can look at other options. So it could be a particular inclusion plan regarding if a club's, for example, got lower female participation than other clubs. It could be a particular plan regarding tackling that particular issue. Outside of that, we also have the performance subsidies. So that does provide rebates on sports ground and pavilion fees for clubs that do encourage and promote inclusion. And that's something that we're looking to, I guess, increase the goals that we've previously had, in particular female participation, so both playing and in regards to committee members, as well as engaging with new arrival communities.
Just one further question, if I may. Just
Briefly, thank you.
I just wasn't clear about how, when, or how would we do that work. Do we need to do that work as part of endorsing this particular framework plan, or is it work that we need to do outside the framework plan? And if so, can I get some direction in terms of how to initiate that work and those options?
Sorry, through you, Meredy. I believe it's work we can do outside the framework. So in regards to a club that is potentially receiving capital works upgrades, that's work that we can undertake outside of this framework, and we can put together and obviously work with councillors in regards to what that would look like.
Thank you for those responses. Councillors, are there any further questions? No. I'll then ask if there is a motion. Councillor Amir? Sorry, Councillor Amir had a hand up first.
No, I'm happy to second the motion.
Happy to second it? Okay, so
You've moved it.
so Councillor Amir, can I just confirm what you're moving?
I'm happy to move the recommendation as in the agenda.
Thank you. And Councillor Greco, you are happy to second that? Thank you. Councillor Amir.
I'm very happy to see this framework come to us at Council. It's something we've been talking about for a long time. Since I first became elected as a councillor, I'm sure it's the same for other councillors as well. We're often contacted by members or club presidents from different sports clubs. Often that leads to us visiting the clubs, whether it's to do a site visit or go along to events or social functions or to watch a game. And we all have friends and family who are involved in sports clubs around Darebin. And we know how important sports clubs are, not just for the physical exercise component, but community building and social engagement and the many benefits to come. One of the challenges, though, that does come along with these relationships, both through our personal networks and through the professional networks we develop as councillors, is it makes it difficult for us to make, it can make it sometimes difficult for us to make objective decisions about individual clubs. There'll be some clubs that we will be able to see in detail and hear from the members the challenges they're facing, either due to the infrastructure being degraded, whether it's the fields being too bumpy and people rolling their ankles, or whether it's a capacity issue and they want to have lights added in so that they can run more games in the night. We can see some of those things, but not everything. So for a long time now, we've been talking about whether we can have a framework that provides evidence-based approach, and that's exactly what we've got here. So I'm very glad to be speaking to this tonight. So the framework we've got has 3 criteria. One is about being fit for purpose, including access for people with disabilities and people of all genders. One around participation outcomes, to be able to increase participation, especially for underrepresented groups, and also around needs and community benefit. So the framework is absolutely consistent with Council's values, not just of supporting community sport, but also focus on diversity with young people, people of different genders, and multicultural communities, including refugee players. The framework doesn't cover all sports, but it does cover baseball, cricket, AFL, rugby, soccer, hockey, tennis, gridiron. It will be used to guide us as an important source of data for the upcoming budgets and for budgets to come. The report we've got here also recognises how structural barriers can impact on participation and involvement in sport, particularly for women. So I'm glad that we've been doing a lot of work in that space. And I want to say thanks to the team for your very hard work on this over a long time. And I am proud to be taking this really rigorous approach and values-based approach going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mary. Look, I'd like to congratulate the officers on the work that they've done. I know we've had a lot of debates in relation to this particular piece of work, but I think it's been an important debate and an important discussion that we've had. I think in looking at this particular policy, we've tried to look at it beyond just purely from a sporting sort of framework or purely from an engineering framework, where we've tried to infuse this particular policy with what are the social impacts of what we're doing. Because we spend a lot of money, a lot of council money, a lot of council time, and a lot of council resources in relation to this. And unless this particular policy and framework is infused with a social outcome, we're not then therefore able to achieve a lot of the other things that council promotes itself on. So I'm glad that we've been able to push this further and further along. It's important that we do push this further and further along, because we need the greater participation of more marginalised groups in our community. And we need that for the very reason that sport, as part of the Australian culture, is usually a good avenue and a good window for young people particularly marginalised people, to participate in Australian life, and through that gain access to contacts, networks, and many other things. And so I'm glad that the weighting that we've done here, and particularly the last minute changes, where if 2 projects are identical, one of the determining factors of a project will be what social benefits that project actually delivered us in relation to social inclusion. And then the final point that I've made, look, been on council for 12 years, you visit lots of clubs. So just this year I visited a few clubs, and in today's age, it's really hard to see when you go to a pavilion and there are no women's change rooms or women's toilets. You just think that like you may be back in the 50s, and it's and so therefore that's why this is important, that we actually have this particular weighting and we move in that particular direction.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. We'll now move to item 8.7, intention to declare a special charge solar saver scheme. Councillor McCarthy, I won't take a motion just yet. I'll just check and see whether there are any questions. So are there any questions of Ms Olivier before we begin? No. Councillor McCarthy, I'll take it that you had a motion you wish to move.
The officer's recommendation is listed.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Lasserf. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor, and you'll excuse my enthusiasm in relation to this item, because it's one of those ones that we never tire of moving in the chamber. It is also an item that we do need to move into the chamber, because, of course, it requires us to declare a special charge scheme. This relates to the latest batch of solar savers, both residents and businesses. And as councillors would have seen from the report, the business program in particular continues to expand and grow, and in this case, in a quite a new and interesting direction. The majority of businesses that have signed up are actually businesses that are looking for smaller systems. So they're small businesses that don't have the electricity consumption of some of our previous solar saver business sign-ups. But they do want to take up the benefits that we're offering through this program, and we know how important this will be for these sorts of businesses, some of which are retail frontage businesses that will no doubt experience some disruption over coming months. Here is a way that we can help them, and I'd make that invitation to other businesses to consider jumping on board with Solar Saver. Just to encapsulate what this will mean for these businesses in particular, which are largely concentrated in High Street and in Station Street, those businesses will see, for every 10 kilowatt system installed, savings of between $1,000 to $2,000 per annum, and upon the completion of the payback period, they'll be seeing savings of in the order of $2,000 to $3,000 per annum, which is actually a fantastic outcome, because that is money that they can either reinvest in employing people, supporting the growth of their business in other ways, instead of spending that money on electricity, which is not what we want them to be doing. In total, we'll see 133 kilowatts installed. And there's 10 installations as part of that batch, and that delivers a terrific outcome of 204 tonnes of CO2 that is avoided through that process. Likewise, we have some installations in our residential category. The vast majority of these are high priority households, so they're low income households. They are people that have been waiting, in some cases for a while, to actually get into the program, and we've brought them forward to make sure they do not miss out and they can reap those benefits. In total, we're going to be installing 50 kilowatts of solar on these low income households, and of course that's going to deliver 73 tonnes of CO2 averted. So these are really practical outcomes for businesses, for residents, that are going to make a difference in both cases. And importantly, they also contribute to that total target of the 4,000 installations over 4 years that is in our council plan, which we are ahead of target to achieve. So I thank our officers and congratulate those businesses and residents for getting on board.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasserf.
I really don't have much to add to that. But just to, I guess, reiterate Councillor McCarthy's points he's made on celebrating businesses' uptake of the Solar Saver program, and particularly along the retail streets right across Darebin. And I don't want to name names, but I'm going to, because there are a diverse list of businesses that are signing up to this. It's really pleasing to see Terra Madre as one of them, and I guess it's really on brand for them. But there are a variety of other businesses, pizza shops, burger grilled in Fairfield Books, that are really signing on and getting the benefits out of this program, which is really great to see. Retail is going to perhaps be an industry that might be impacted in the coming months, and if this is going to help them lower their expenses and see them through the period ahead, then I think that's also a good thing too.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers? No, there being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 8.8, supply of energy contracts for council operations. Are there any questions, firstly, of Ms Olivier? There being none, we'll move to a motion. Councillor Lasserf, do you have a motion? Okay, so on 8.8, Councillor Lasserf is moving the officer recommendation. Is there a seconder? Councillor McCarthy? Councillor Lasserf, we'll just wait for that to get up on the board. Councillor Lasserf, because that's got names of businesses in there, I'll just get you to confirm now that it's on the board that it is what you intended.
Yep.
Okay, so the motion is as per the screen, moved by Councillor Lassurf, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lassurf, over to you.
Okay, so this motion is to award a number of contracts for electricity and gas. As most people are aware, we are currently working on the local government power purchase agreement, and we had hoped that we could roll over to that contract before the end of our current contract, which is at the 30th of June, and there is no option to extend the current contract. Unfortunately, there have been some delays in getting the PPA to a point where we can sign a contract, and I guess it is, an indication of the interest and the complexity of the PPA project with getting so many councils on board with the idea. So 48 councils trying to get them through a tender process together is a complex process which will obviously there has been some hurdles. So to get us through until we sign the PPA, this motion will award electricity contracts for a period of time. It's different for different accounts that we have. That is through the state government procurement or purchasing contracts. It is a really, actually a really competitive offer, and will actually be saving money through entering into these agreements, which is pleasing to see, and that we will be instead of buying renewable energy, offsetting the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the electricity. So the greenhouse emissions will still be zero, it's just in a different form until we roll into the PPA. This is also a motion to enter into new gas contracts, and again we are going through the same state government purchasing contract, which offers a very competitive price. I will end by saying that I am looking forward to seeing the local government power purchase agreement go through its process and come to us again, so that we can purchase our electricity from a renewable energy source. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. Councillor Lassurf has covered it extensively. And as councillors would see, this is not a long-term arrangement for us. It is an interim arrangement while the LGPPA, the Local Government Power Purchase Agreement, passes the next stage in the process. It is a complex project. It is unprecedented in local government in Victoria, and I believe around the country, to have so many councils in a group buying program in the way that we have facilitated. And I would make that point to say that the LGPPA is a project that has had an enormous amount of Darebin input into it as the lead council. In relation to the contracts we have before us, we do need to provide security of supply, and as Councillor Lassurf has pointed out, we have competitive options here. I would just note that the LGPPA as a project in general is a market-shifting project, and I think it's no surprise that we've been able to negotiate strong outcomes here in relation to these various contracts, which are large and small market. People want to do business with us. We are leaders in this space, and we need to work through the processes as outlined in the report for the larger project, but we also need to provide that security of supply in the interim. So I support the way forward as listed, and look forward to keeping the lights on.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. We're now at 8.9, multi-sport stadium update. We'll ask firstly to get the team up and see if there are any questions. Thank you. Do any councillors have questions for the officers before we begin debate? No? I'll therefore ask if there is a motion. Councillor McCarthy.
The officer's recommendation.
It's moved by Councillor McCarthy, seconded by Councillor Lassurf. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. Thank you to our officers, and sorry we don't have any questions for you. And thank you for also sticking with us late into the evening. I'd also thank you for your work, and in fact for the whole team that's got us to this stage. Just to be clear, and for those that have joined us This recommendation is, in fact, for Council to endorse the design and construct procurement process for the MSS, the multi-sport stadium. This is a significant decision, and it's one of a number of significant decisions that this council will make as we go forward, because this is literally one of the most significant projects that this city has undertaken in its time. And that is because it's not just about building a facility that is, a combination of physical structures, traffic plans and all those sorts of things, but it's actually something that's going to deliver significant outcomes for our community, particularly in relation to increasing and supporting the participation of women and girls in sport and throughout the year, and not just during the day, but also in the evening. So this is a visionary project. It's a project that has been backed by our community. And I would just recall for councillors that it was a petition of 1,000 netballers and basketballers from local clubs that said they supported this and wanted this to go ahead back in 2013, 2014, that really built the community momentum around this project and has given council the confidence to move in this direction. I'm pleased to see with the community engagement process that we've gone through, there is endorsement. That endorsement continues. The need is still there, and in fact, the work that's been going on behind the scenes, which is detailed work, has finally got us to this stage. So, in terms of the process going forward, this is really about getting us into a position where we can get the right contractors in place to actually undertake that construction process. I'm so pleased, and I will just say thank you again to all who've brought this together, particularly our officers and the community members who've contributed and participated, and of course the design team as well. So I'll end it there, and I really look forward to seeing the MSS once it is built and opened, and we are getting closer and closer with every one of these decisions.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasser.
The only added a couple of points to Councillor McCarthy's remarks, in that we are going down the procurement model of a design and construct model rather than just a construct only. And the report does detail a range of benefits by doing this, and that includes transferring, I guess, the risks and the obligations from of the design and the construction onto one group or consortia, which I think will be a good thing in terms of making sure that what's designed is delivered and we can hold people to account. The only other point that I will raise as well that's really exciting is that it is going to be designed as a Green Star, 5-star rated building. And I don't know that it's a first, but I feel like it could be. I'm not sure if we could claim that. Is there many other 5-star stadiums around? I don't know of many, so it must be up there. And that's really exciting because, you know, we are designing our buildings for the future. We want to make sure that we are constructing them as efficiently as possible, not just in terms of the construction material, but the operation of the building into the future. So I'm really looking forward to, every time a report comes to council, it's really exciting to see how it progresses, because we have been on a long journey with the community on this project, and it's where the rubber hits the road now, so it's really exciting.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers? No? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Councillors, that brings us to the end of consideration of reports. Move to consideration of responses to petitions, notices of motions and general business. There are none. Thank you to the team members who stayed for that one, who are on their way home. We'll now move to notices of motion, with the first being 10.1 sporting clubs with liquor licences. Councillor Williams, I'll take that as moved by you.
Yep, certainly.
Thank you, and seconded by Councillor Amir. Councillor Williams.
I've requested this report for the benefit of other councillors to gain the further understanding and the complexities of liquor licences. Such licences impact not only the club's revenues and connecting the players and families to socialise together, but also it is to the community, especially the adjacent properties and the impacts that it has on them. I have no idea on how many sporting clubs in Darebin have liquor licences, nor do I know how they are granted or who grants them and who has the powers in taking the licences away, or what consequences do clubs face if they breach these contractual agreements. The second part is a no-brainer that if there's any complaints or incidents that have occurred, ultimately we as councillors need to continue that council assets and clubs are used appropriately and not abused.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Amir.
Thank you. I do support this motion. I guess I don't necessarily support that it needs to be a notice of motion as opposed to something that could be requested in a briefing or by email. But given the importance of this issue, I'm happy to support in this case. So I believe it's come to light because of reports from residents, in particular around behaviour of the cricket club at TW Blake, who have been pretty unfriendly neighbours. There's been reports of violence, of loud parties beyond what their liquor licence allows, littering, yelling and screaming at children and other horrible things. Liquor licences are a challenging issue in the sense that on one hand can be a source of income for the club, providing an opportunity for social events and so forth, but then also increasing the risk of things we know are associated with alcohol consumption, like loudness, like violence and littering as well. So I hope that through this notice of motion and the report, we've already got some information provided by officers, so I don't believe it would we'd need too much more in addition to what we've already been provided, but it is an opportunity for us to, as Councillor Williams said, consider this issue, and I'd say that access to green open space is absolutely a public right of residents. To have exclusive access to clubs and facilities by a single club is not a right. It's absolutely a privilege and a responsibility, and if we have clubs that are not behaving in the way that the community and as council would expect, then that's something that we do need to look at closely.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 10.2. Councillor Williams, I'll take that as moved by you. Yes. Is there a seconder? Councillor Greco, thank you. Councillor Williams.
Over the last 7 years, Darebin Council has been very committed to working towards a no-kill policy. Since the RSPCA contract with Darebin Council, the goal was to ensure that all parties work together for a no-kill outcome. And in the last few months, councillors have heard from the community that they are very concerned in reference to our contractual agreement and our obligations in outlining in this contract. So I've brought this to council because I think it'd be good to get an update of where we're at, and ensuring that the report will give to council an update on the process and where in relation to the concerns that have raised by community and how they can be addressed, and if so, council's connection with RSPCA, rescue groups and the community, which are hopefully are all working towards a no-kill policy.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco?
So I have some amendments to the wording just to provide some
So
clarity.
we'll
Seconder first?
We did get a seconder, and I'm sorry, there was a bit of a muck up. The words that are on the screen now are Councillor Williams's words, and the motion was seconded by Councillor Greco. Councillor Greco, I'm assuming you were seconding the words as you saw them in the papers, so that those mirror the words on the screen. Councillor Greco, as the seconder, over to you.
Just very briefly, I think Councillor Williams has covered the issue. And as Councillor Williams has said, I mean, we've seen here in the chamber where we've had people who are concerned around this issue approach us. And from memory, I think council has done a lot of good work in this space, has built up a lot of trust with a lot of the rescue groups. And because of our good work and also because of our the policy approach that we did take in regards to a no-kill approach to saving animals. So I think it would be good to do a bit of a stock take and to get a report from our officers, and for that report actually to come back to council. Why I think that's important is that there's been a public demand on us about where we're at in relation to this policy, and I think it's only good that we do respond in a public way through a council report in order to show where we are at and also to show how we're tracking in regards to this particular policy, and where perhaps some of the obstacles have been, and how we can in future overcome those obstacles. And I think it all needs to be done in good faith, and also maintaining and enhancing the trust and the partnership that we have developed with the animal rescue groups.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor McCarthy.
I'd like to amend the motion as listed. Mayor, I've provided wording to officers.
Councillor McCarthy, can you confirm whether that's the amendment you intended?
Not exactly. There's the written text actually tidies up some of the language there. So C should say compare how many animals did rescue groups. So we're switching between singular and plural, unfortunately. So compare how many animals did rescue groups. So rescue groups being plural, and how many, and then in that same sentence, how many animals do rescue groups receive today? And also in D, it should be identify any trends in regard to euthanasia rates compared to that of 5 years ago.
Thank you for proposing that amendment, Councillor McCarthy. I'll go to the mover and the seconder and see if that's acceptable to them. So, Councillor Williams?
I'm just reading it, sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, that's fine.
And Councillor Greco? Okay, thank you for that amendment, Councillor McCarthy. That's been accepted by the mover and the seconder, so that is now the substantive motion. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you to both Councillor Williams and Councillor Greco for accepting the amendments, and I welcome the notice of motion. Having had a long history in this issue alongside Councillor Williams in relation to the challenges that both pet owners in our community have faced in terms of securing the animals from the previous shelter arrangement, and of course also the partnership with rescue groups. There's not I suppose, a universal understanding in relation to where we are at and where we have been, and I think that the report that will come from this will help draw out some of those issues that both Councillor Williams and Councillor Greco have discussed and explored. I think it's also worth us broadening the inquiry a little bit further to ask about trends. And I say trends because there's both trends in relation to euthanasia rates, both within the period of the contract and also before the contract with the RSPCA Animal Shelter. And I think it's really important to us to be open to what trends have occurred and also to help us understand how to get the best value out of that arrangement, both for our pet owners, the animals that are rescued and hopefully wherever possible returned or provided to other people that can take them home. So I'm really keen to see what those numbers look like. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in our community around this, and I think that there's a strong desire to see both council and community objectives, which is the best outcome for animals to actually be what is put at the forefront here. I'm not interested in the debate about different organisations, which is the best shelter. If we have a contract that says deliver an outcome, that should be the basis upon which the contract is measured, and I think that's the spirit of the motion as read. And I thank the Councillor Williams for bringing it to us.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Williams, you've spoken. Before we vote, can I just note we're missing a Y on the end of healthy. We won't deal with that as an amendment. We'll just add a Y onto healthy in the second line. Are there any further speakers? No. So we'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 10.3. Macedonian Senior Citizens Club. Councillor Williams, I'll take that as moved by you.
Yes.
Is there a seconder?
Yes, I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
I've asked for this to come to council because it's been a number of years. The Macedonian Seniors Citizens Club's been waiting for upgrades to occur. So I'm hoping that the report identifies the extent of the renewal upgrades that are covered in the current budget under the Building Renewal Program. And I'm all for upgrades to assets, but particularly where seniors congregate together. There's definitely a need for the renewal of the Macedonian Senior Cits Club, which I've already mentioned in Donald Street, Preston. If we want our age-friendly Darebin, we really need to be providing and achieving a functional facility that meet the needs for our ageing residents, continue to be active in the community physically, socially, emotionally, and for mental health reasons, to ensure the well-being of our active citizens are supported all round. I would hope to see in the report what upgrades will be occurring at this site, whether it be like a kitchen, toilet upgrade, or if it's a new paintwork that might be part of the upgrade. So that was the whole reason of asking for the report.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco.
Just very quickly, I think Councillor Williams has covered it. Just tonight we've been talking about services to our ageing community. I think it would be worthwhile to just get a report. It's a report that actually could come to us sometime later when we are expecting to receive reports in regards to how we're tracking with our age-friendly strategy. And I think it'll be a worthwhile report in terms of just drilling down in regards to what this particular facility is providing to our community. It's a significant investment, and so it'll be good to know how far it reaches and whether we could actually make it reach even further than what it's currently envisaged for.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Lasserf.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I won't be supporting this motion, and there's a couple of reasons for that. I think the information that Councillor Williams has requested has largely been provided by officers already, so to bring it to a briefing next week I think would be superfluous. The other thing I think is that to receive this information in isolation of the broader work that's happening around our senior citizens' facilities is too narrow. In the council plan, we did call for a review of all of our senior citizen centres, and officers have been working on that and have undertaken an assessment to that effect. So if we were to receive any information in a briefing, I would prefer it to be about the broader program of works. But to a point that Councillor Amir raised earlier, I think that this notice of motion could have been dealt with in an email to officers and could have received this information, which we already have in front of us tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Williams, you have a right of reply if you would like to exercise it.
Well, I feel that sometimes it falls on deaf ears, and the reason why I brought it to as a notice of motion, because I've been requesting for this particular senior citizen club to be upgraded, and I've been asking what type of upgrades will or can be occurred, and I'd say this would be going back for nearly 8 years. So, and that's why I've asked for a notice of motion. Normally I would just ask the officers during a briefing, but the fact that I haven't received any clarification, I have brought it as a notice of motion.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. We'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is lost. We'll now move to item 10.4, ZWA schematic design. Councillor Williams, I'll take that as moved by yourself. Yes. We'll just make sure that we get that up on the screen. Oh, Councillor Williams, you indicated you had an interest at the beginning in relation to this matter. Do you wish to elaborate?
That my children play at ZWA Park through a football club.
That's not a conflict of interest, so you don't need to actually declare that.
Okay.
Thank you. So we'll note that this has been moved by you and seconded by Councillor Greco. Thank you. Councillor Williams.
The concept design for ZWA Reserve has already been completed, and the schematic design is not scheduled till the year 2037. That is 17 years away from now. By that time, I will be in a nursing home, aged care facility. This council needs to take into consideration the clubs that are growing and not just the pavilions which need upgrades. Back in 2012, Preston Bullants Junior Club had 7 teams. Currently, they have 15 teams for 2020, which is over double since 2012. With 383 players, that doesn't include the senior players or the West Preston Cricket Club. Preston Civic Oval has been the Preston Bullants home ground since 2001. The 20 years that the club has been advocating towards the many changes and improvements that have occurred at PCO. The community and the Preston Bullants feel they are back at square one and have been allocated ZWA Reserve for the players to practice on and have games. Not one practice or game has been forecast at the Preston Civic Oval. ZWA is not very user-friendly, nor does it accommodate the club's growing needs. Firstly, the club's canteen food is stored elsewhere, and all preparation is not permissible on site due to unhygienic and OH&S reasons. Secondly, the uniforms are located at PCO because ZWA does not have the storage space. Thirdly, ZWA Reserve discriminates when it comes to toilets. Currently, there's a total of 4 toilets, which is also the change rooms for the females and young mothers. The 4 toilets are used by players, coaches, visitors, members, people with disabilities, compared to the Preston Civic Oval, which has over 20, including a unisex and a disability access toilet. The Preston Bullants is one of the largest growing football junior footy clubs in Darebin for Darebin residents, predominantly a sport for males since 2001. The growing numbers of females and girls-only teams and kids with disabilities joining the club. The club helps alleviate disadvantaged families, including single mothers. It also delivers better outcomes for the community. The community sees the club as a trailblazer, running workshops, seminars and programs for the players, such as the SALT program. To stamp out violence, shining the light on such programs continues to teach the players about one-hit punch, bullying, looking after your mates, mental health issues, alcohol, drug and gambling online, and teaching them about respectful relationships with females. 1 woman a week is murdered by her current and former partner, which could easily be anyone's sister, daughter, mother,
10
niece or
seconds.
auntie. The club needs to continue to grow, predominantly ensuring the kids living in Darebin grow and stay together. With the number of players doubling every 4 years, it can't wait till 2037, as this council will be holding back this club from growing
Time,
if we
thank
wait
you.
to 2037.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco.
Mayor Rennie, may I ask a question I forgot to ask at the outset? Or
Sure.
yeah, just in terms of the schematic designs, I just wanted to know what impact that would have on our budget.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll refer that to Mr Hewitt.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. If we're talking about taking it to a schematic and detailed design, you're probably talking about 8 to 10% of a construction cost. So depending upon what is required at this site, you might be talking, if it were $1 million redevelopment, you're talking $100,000 for design next year, and then you'd be talking about the $1 million the year after. And equally, it goes up by that proportion.
Thank you, Mr Hewitt.
So,
Councillor Greco.
just to understand, so it's $100,000 we're talking about? So,
Through you, Mayor Rennie. I was just trying to give you an example of, it's around 10% of the construction value. So if the council proposed to spend $1 million on the redevelopment, I don't know what it is, but if it were, it would commit about $100,000 to the design elements.
Thank you, Councillor Greco.
yeah, look, Mayor Rennie, just on the basis of what I've heard and also what Councillor Williams has just said, I think that this motion does have some merit, particularly when we look at those dates. 2037 is 17 years away, and why I say that Mayor Rennie, is that, as we know, Preston is one of the fastest growing areas in terms of population and growth, and so in a way, council needs to sort of get its infrastructure ready for the influx that is continuously occurring, particularly in the centre of our city. So I think it will be worthy to go through this process. I'm glad that I asked how much it was. It's approximately, I know that there's a formula there, but I think it's something that we could accommodate within our budget, and get some of those schematic designs, and then see from that where we go from there.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there further speakers? Councillor Amir.
Thank you, and thank you to Councillor Williams for that extensive information. It certainly sounds like that Preston Bullants are doing wonderful work and are trailblazers, as you say. However, I will be speaking against this notice of motion. The reason for that is that earlier this evening we adopted the Outdoor Sports Infrastructure Framework, and I spoke about how important that was for making evidence-based decisions. And I believe that part of that is being led by the framework, and I understand that it's difficult when we see facilities that are in needs of upgrade. We see the struggles, like Councillor Williams mentioned, around the difficulties with the catering, with the fields not being fit for purpose, and I hope that discussions or resolution might be possible with the Preston Bullants to find sites that will meet their needs and will continue to allow the club to support and do the great work that they do, particularly with the junior teams. But we also need to consider this in regards to the context of the work that's been undertaken. So as is mentioned, there's been the concept design developed. We've also been a range of works undertaken recently with new toilets, storage, carpet, fencing, scoreboard, and landscaping, and a new wicket. So some clubs haven't had any upgrades in a lot longer, and it does sound like that if this pavilion was built, that it would be very well utilised. We do need to look at that within the context of every club in Darebin, and so certainly I'd encourage the Bullants to make a submission to the budget process, as all clubs can, so that we can consider that alongside the needs of all Darebin sports clubs.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers? No. Councillor Williams, you have a right of reply.
Nothing further to add.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour? And And against? That motion is lost. That brings us to item 10.5, Preston Market 50th anniversary.
May I move that motion?
Thank you. That's moved by Councillor Greco. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, as the motion spells out, the Preston Market will be having its 50th birthday this year. I believe it's in August. And I understand that there's a lot of interest in the community and also with the traders themselves. And I understand also the market management to sort of commemorate the 50th anniversary of this market. It's been an icon for our city. As the context heritage report, the original report that was prepared for the market has stated, the market has definitely has local significance. And as we've seen from the report that came out of the Heritage Council, also they're demonstrating that that the market has, whilst it doesn't have state significance, it surely has local significance, or at least local significance should be something that should be clearly looked at. What's been proposed there in the motion, it's I think it's an opportunity to involve the various groups and associations that have had various opinions on the market, and I think a celebration could actually bring all those parties together, both the management, the traders, the Save the Preston Market Group, also the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council, and also other players there. I haven't mentioned it in the motion, but also we had a really informative address here by one of the original architects, and that will be somebody that could be incorporated and under the catch-all of other residents and other stakeholders. Again, I just want to emphasise it'll be a real opportunity to just draw everyone together around celebrating the anniversary of the market, given the issues that have been associated with the market, and I think it's one of those dates that we should not skip. And that, as a council, given all the work that we've done around the market and the work that we're currently doing around the market in terms of preparing other reports, that we go off on the front foot and actually help to coordinate and help to bring together this group so that we can plan for the celebration of the market. Having said all that, I hope that in August, things would have calmed down with what's affecting us at the moment, that we can actually have a community celebration. It'll probably be one of the first community celebrations that we'll be having, hopefully, when the coronavirus issue settles down. So I hope the councillors will support this motion so that we can start inviting people to be part of this group and then working together and developing a plan for an appropriate celebration.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
I reserve my rights.
Thank you. Councillor Newton.
I'd like to propose some amendments that have been circulated with the governance team.
Thank you. We'll get... I'm just giving the mover and the seconder a moment to read that proposed amendment, and then I'll ask the mover and the seconder whether they accept the amendment.
Yeah, I think that this motion really cannot...
It's a yes or no. So
No, I'm making a point of order. That I think that this motion really cannot be accepted because it's contrary to the spirit of the motion that he's here before us.
Okay, I'll seek...
As an amendment.
I'll seek some advice as to whether this is contrary. Mr. Marn?
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Upon my reading of the motion, no, I wouldn't have thought it was contrary to the spirit. There might be some slight changes in terms of the establishment of a council working group and the like, but I think it's generally in line with the the spirit of the first motion.
Councillor Greco, the advice that I've received, which is similar to what my thoughts would be, is that it is consistent with the motion that you moved. So,
Therefore, I want to move a motion of dissent in relation to your direction.
so it's. I haven't ruled on a point of order. I've taken advice and made a ruling that this is consistent. I'll just check in the local law whether there's provision for a motion of dissent. I'm not sure that there is. I think motion of dissents relate to points of order. So, Councillor Greco, there is no provision in the local law to dissent in the ruling of the chair in relation to a matter such as this. Dissent, according to the local law, relates to points of order, and this is not a point of order. So, I'll take it that you don't accept the amendment and will therefore debate the amendment. So, the first thing I'll ask is there a seconder for the amendment that Councillor Newton has proposed? That's been seconded by Councillor McCarthy. So we'll debate the amendment, starting with the mover of the amendment. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I really commend Councillor Greco for bringing this to us. This is just a few amendments to make it a little bit more focused. So I completely agree with Councillor Greco that I really hope that we are back and able to celebrate by August. I'm really fingers crossed for that. And I think for council, this is something that Preston Market, we always want to support as much as we can. So to be able to have our community stakeholders contribute, such as Save Our Preston Market Group, the market traders, Darwin Ethnic Communities Council, DARTA and other stakeholders to get their contributions, find out what they want. I think it can make it the best anniversary that we can hope for, and fingers crossed we'll be able to do it in person.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
I'll reserve my right.
Okay. Are there further speakers to the amendment?
Yes, Mayor Rennie. Look, when I look at my original motion and when I look at this motion, my original motion, there are clearly actions for the council to undertake. That is to establish a council working group and actually council to invite representatives to be part of that working group and for council actually to assist and coordinate that work. This motion that we have before us, or this amendment that we have before us, has no action items. The only thing that it does, it just encourages the community stakeholders to participate. That's why I was making the point that it's substantially different to what I've been proposing here. What this motion does is just basically a motion noting that there's going to be, that the market's turning 50 and that whoever wants to get involved in the celebrations can get involved. And that's the only, and it doesn't make any further commitment from council in regards to it. My motion, which makes a clear commitment. Why? Because we are committed to the market in relation to all the work that we've been doing in regards to it. It's on our, it's an iconic piece of the city of Darebin, and it's only proper that the council steps forward and becomes an active player together with others in helping to organise and conceptualise what these celebrations are. This motion does not do that, and it goes clearly contrary to what I was trying to promote in my motion, where the council plays a much more determinative and a much more active role in bringing the community together. We're the party that can do that, and we're the party that can actually bring those various groups together that have been at times at loggerheads with one another, and I think that the council is an opportunity to actually bring that together and bring back an harmonious celebration of the market. If we proceed with this particular motion, what it could do, it could actually divide what takes place in terms of the celebrations, because certain groups may not feel that they would want to participate in this particular form.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm really pleased that Councillor Newton has actually identified what's actually already going on, and I just would draw Council's attention to point 2, which says very clearly there is already a working group in place. The Preston Market Management has put in place, and traders and council are already engaged. So my concern with the original motion that Councillor Greco put forward, and why I'm supporting the amendment here, is that the reality is we don't want 2 parallel processes running that actually are doing effectively the same thing. We are much better placed to actually do the thing that Councillor Greco, I think, has just pleaded for us to do, which is to unite people and not divide people. My concern with the original motion, as it was listed, actually is that it runs the risk of having 2 completely separate processes. Which one is the official one? What are Preston market traders actually supposed to engage with? It becomes a bit confusing and a bit tiresome for Preston market traders who are trying to run businesses in a really difficult economic environment over the next few months to be trying to participate in 2 parallel processes. So let's just be frank about what we're trying to do here. We're trying to bring people together. We're trying to build a united community response to what should be a fantastic celebration of Preston Market and its wonderful history. So I would ask councillors to support Councillor Newton's amendment. It is a way forward. If Preston Market Management does not take up the opportunity that I think we're putting forward here to actually invite that diverse range of community stakeholders, then I think we should then be asking a critical question as to why not. But we haven't given them that opportunity yet. Let's give them that opportunity. Let's call them on this opportunity and say, here is a chance to bring people together to the table in an inclusive process. That's what's on offer here. Let's give that the best shot. It is currently March. The celebration is hopefully going to be in August, and we've got time to go back to them again if not.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Amir.
In this case, I would have to agree that the motion we have here is not consistent with the original intent of the motion, as Councillor Greco has stated, and for the same reason that the core intent of the motion is to create a new group, and this amended motion does not create a new group. However, that said, I would not be able to support the original motion for reasons outlined by Councillor McCarthy. There is already a working group in place. As we all know, it's not a council-owned site. We don't have jurisdiction over it by running 2 parallel groups that could create confusion for traders, for the community. And I believe that Preston Market, as the people who own the site, the people who run the site, the people who live and breathe it 24/7 are the ones that are best placed to lead. And I hope, as was mentioned by Councillor McCarthy, that they will agree that everyone who has an interest in Preston Market, including community groups such as the ones listed here, will have the opportunity to participate. I'd also note that this amended motion here doesn't prevent council from continuing to do the work we've been doing quite intensively over the last few years around talking about through social media, through arts projects, through community engagement projects, getting those stories about why Preston Market is so important to people, sharing those stories and creating that sense of community and the combination of diversity and inclusion, which is one of the core things that why we all love the market. So I'm sure that work will continue to happen in parallel as a complement to the work that is already being undertaken rather than in competition with work that's already commenced.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? No. Therefore, I'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is carried. So we'll note that Councillor Greco voted against the amendment. Thank you. Was that? And we'll note that Councillor Williams voted against the amendment. We're now back on debate on the motion. We've heard from Councillor Greco and Councillor Williams. Are there any further?
No, you haven't heard from me.
Sorry, apologies.
And I didn't also get the opportunity to actually say no to the amendment.
Councillor Greco said no, that's enough. So, once one person has said no, it has to go to the debate. So only one person needs to do that. So, are there any further speakers to the motion? Councillor Williams.
This is my second term as a councillor here, and there's no doubt the Preston market has brought many debates here in this chamber amongst councillors and the community, especially on issues like parking meters at the Preston market or a planning application for multiple towers. I applaud my fellow councillors in bringing this, Councillor Greco, in bringing this notice of motion to the chamber. This is more desirable and pleasing, but also a significant milestone that we should be proud of here in Darebin to celebrate. The Preston Market is a unique, iconic site that sits on 2 hectares of land, and many other markets have come and gone. It's important that Darebin Council work collectively together with the Preston Market and the community, which will enrich Darebin and the many benefits to ensure a great outcome for the community.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. There are no further speakers, so I'll put that to the vote.
I have a right of reply.
No, you don't have a right of reply because
An actual amendment to the motion.
there has been an amendment.
No, there hasn't. The amendment got refused.
No,
Sorry, the amendment got, sorry.
sorry, just to be clear, so the motion was amended.
I apologise. My mistake.
That's okay. So I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 10.6, Edwards Lake Toxicity and Boathouse Development. Councillor Greco will take
I move that motion.
Moved by you, thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Williams. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. The reason I'm moving this motion is obviously in relation to the boathouse and also in relation to the toxicity levels in regards to the Edwards Lake. What this motion basically does is that it calls for a council report to see where we are at, particularly with the boathouse, and also in relation to the water toxicity levels of the lake. As we know, look, I've been on this council nearly now 12 years, and there's been absolutely no movement, I would say, in relation to the boathouse. And whilst there's been many attempts to try and get the boathouse some sort of development in relation to the boathouse, some sort of community development, there's a lot of interest in making something happen in that space. There's been a bit of a stop-start approach. We're reaching the end of our reaching the end of our 4-year term, and at least I would like to get and for the community to hear what the status is in regards to the boathouse. So I'm hoping for something to come forward in regards to that. In relation to the lake and in relation to the toxicity of the water in the lake, again, this is an issue which has come up at council once before, many years ago, something that I brought up, and I think it's really an embarrassment on the part of council where we consider ourselves to be a council at the vanguard in relation to environmental policy, where we have a lake within our city, which is the second biggest lake in the Melbourne metropolitan area, that we're basically saying to people, don't dip your toe in it because you could lose it. And so what's important that we do is that we don't seem to have a plan in relation to improving the water quality of the lake. I'm the first to understand and acknowledge that it's not something that council could do alone. Fully understand that. Fully understand the geographic position of the lake, the upstream, the contamination that comes from our region. So it's not something that we can do alone. But we don't seem to be moving and have a strategy in regards to where we want to be with this lake in the next 2, 3, 5 years. 5 years' time. We develop lots of plans and strategies, and we do that well in regards to asset management and the way that we allocate our resources for refurbishment of our pavilions and things. But in regards to the lake, it's just there. It's just there. Every now and then we just test the water levels and we just hope for the best, that it doesn't, it's not over-contaminated. So I'm hoping that we can get a report so that we can strategically plan how we need to move forward to improve the water quality of the lake also.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
I reserve my right.
Thank you. Further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'd like to speak against this motion. So we last spoke about the Edwards Lake in this chamber on the 6th of November 2019. We resolved to note that while Edwards Lake is a highly valued community asset, its full recreational potential remains underutilised due to its poor environmental condition. And we also noted that water that feeds into the lake and wetlands comes from streets and via an industrial area, which brings with it a range of pollutants and risk of pollution and continues to remain untreated or unfiltered. So as a result of that motion, we're currently looking into what Edward Lake Park improvements might be there. We've looked into water quality. This is something that's certainly come up again and again during my time on council, that it's very unlikely, as Councillor Greco was saying, that you can dip your toe in because it's going to be very unlikely to make it possible to swim in the lake or make it suitable for boating use. It's very difficult to do that. We've also done quite a lot of work on the boat shed, and where it's sitting at the moment is with a strategic property analysis, where it's looking at the asset managements across the council, and we are expecting an outcome of the strategic property assessment process in April 2020. So for me, this one is not necessary at this time because of the 6th of November notice of motion that we are expecting to hear some results of in April 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Williams, you reserved your right. Would you wish to speak?
Edwards Lake is a very iconic site. It's one of the oldest and largest man-made lake in Darebin. To many, it has a very historical significance, and many people in the community, including councillors and previous councillors, would like to see it up and running again. The boathouse would do marvellous things if we got the boathouse up and running. If it was a cafe, it would bring a whole new gathering of people coming there and seeing the site. Many years ago, they used to have swimming competitions, they used to have canoeing, rowboating, until the sad case of when the boathouse was burnt down. We've seen many other areas of water get cleaned up, money invested in areas, and it's had a huge transformation. If you look at the Abbotsford Boathouse, if you look at the Melbourne Yarra, I can't see why that we can't look at doing something further in this area, because it would open the door for many new businesses and many new events that could occur at this site.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers? No. Councillor Greco, you have a right of reply.
Just very quickly, I just make a couple of points to respond to Councillor Newton's objection to this motion. Look, I don't think we could just simply just throw up our hands and say, look, it's all difficult and it's all hard to do, and we really can't, have any practical solutions and a way forward. I think, we need a bit of a strategic approach in relation both to the boathouse and to the water quality of the lake. And what that means to me, because I have to translate this then to residents. When residents ask me what is happening to the boathouse, I have been giving the same response that I've been giving for the last 12 years. I really don't know. There are things in the pipework. Something's going to happen. We really don't know when. Yeah? When people ask me about the water quality of the lake, I really don't have any response to them. All I could say to them, well, we're just monitoring the water quality, see how it goes, provide all the explanations about the upstream, the water coming from the street contaminating the lake and things like that. But I can't give them any type of response about what strategic approach we're going to have and how we're going to try and improve the lake into the future and what we're setting up to make that happen. What advocacy we're doing in that space, who are we working with, and also trying to give them a sense of timeline of when we can expect to see some improvement in regards to the lake. I can't give those responses to my community. So as a result of that, that tells me that there's really a lack of a strategy. I could give those responses in
10
relation to
seconds.
other matters, and that's great, but in relation to these two important matters, I can't do that.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is lost. That takes us to item 10.7, gardening. Councillor Greco, I'll take that as moved by you.
I'm moving that motion.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Williams. Thank you. Councillor Greco, over to you.
Okay, councillors, again, I'm moving this motion in regards to gardening services, and as it's specified here, which is different to what we're currently doing, is that this is a motion in relation to providing gardening services for holders eligible for carers assistance. Now, why this motion has been worded in this particular way, and it's also and what the motion is doing is actually that council basically receives a report in regards to this particular initiative. So it's where we're receiving a report. We're not actually saying we're going to go ahead with it. We're receiving a report, and why it's important that we receive a report in this particular space here is that we know that our elderly citizens, the ones that are on carers assistance, that is, it means by definition they're incapacitated and unable to keep up the maintenance of their gardens. And what they're looking at is not so much a volunteer. I understand the purpose of a volunteer program, and that may be useful for other elderly residents who can participate also in that volunteer program, because that's the notion of that volunteer program, where sort of an active participation of residents in assisting to. Here we're talking about people basically that one is many cases don't have the funds and also don't have the capacity to actually upkeep their gardens. So what the report, I'm hoping, if councillors take interest in approving this particular motion, is to see what that means for us. How many concession card holders of a carers assistance type we have in our city? How could we budget for that? How could we model for that? Let's make some assessment on that and then see whether we can accommodate that within our budget forecast. I don't have that information. I don't think anyone here really has that information. So in order to make an informed decision, an evidence-based decision, as we often say, let's get that information, let's put it before us and then work out whether we can afford something like that, how we can model something like that, so that then we can see whether we can move forward in that direction or not. So I'm putting this forward and seeking that we get that report so that we can make some better judgments and some better decisions in relation to how we can make something like this work.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
I reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Williams, you reserved your right.
We have an issue here where we've heard from our community how they would like assistance and how they feel about their gardens. We have a lot of concessions card holders out there that also need those assistance. We have a lot of people who are receiving cancer treatment who would like some assistance. I think that we need to try and ensure that we are looking out for those people, our most vulnerable in our community. We have the coronavirus right on our back doorstep now. It's going to take many, many months, if not years, for some people possibly to recover from it, especially if they get hit badly physically. It would mentally impact them. And those people will struggle to probably get back on their feet again to be looking after their own gardens. We need to try and look at what other avenues that we can help the most vulnerable in our community, not only in their home, but also in and around their home.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any final speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Sorry, Mayor, I did step out and I might have missed something, but the question I meant to ask earlier was, hasn't this actually been dealt with as part of our aged care review? I'm not actually sure why.
I don't think that they would.
I'll refer that question to Ms McGrath.
Sorry, is that working? Yeah, great. Through Mayor Rennie, it has in part, in that we are about to kick off a trial of the gardening program, and we are due to report back on the success or otherwise of that again in November. We also, in the response, have detailed this potential new cohort of being around 6,000 recipients, and they're people that are registered carers receiving centre care payments, but the NOM also refers to people who are eligible, so that could add a number of other people.
Thank you. Are there any final speakers? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is lost. That brings us to the final NOM, 10.8, in relation to the Baha'i community concerns. Councillor Greco, I'll take that as moved by you.
I have to declare a conflict of interest, sorry.
Yes, Councillor Amir.
I have a conflict of interest due to a conflicting interest in my role as a federal public servant.
Thank you. We'll just wait for Councillor Amir to leave the room. Okay, we'll also acknowledge that there's a minor typo in the heading, and we'll make sure that in any final recording of this matter that typo is corrected. That's in the council papers. So it's seconded by Councillor Newton. Councillor Greco, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, this is a fairly straightforward motion. It's quite explicit in the motion in terms of what this issue is about. I think as councillors, we were approached by the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council, and one of their members is members of the Baha'i community. Also, the Baha'i community are members, very active members of our interfaith group. And I know yourself as Mayor and myself, and I think one or two other councillors attended their 200-year celebration that was held at the North Katown Hall. They're basically, what's happening, they've made an approach through DEC to Council for some support, an act of solidarity, where their community in Iran is currently being persecuted. They've been persecuted for many, many years and many, many decades, but the most recent chapter of that is where the Iranian government is questioning or passed legislation which puts in doubt their legal status as Iranian citizens, and as a result of that, many of the Baha'i community then gets further persecuted in the sense that they don't get access to services and rights that ordinary Iranian citizens do. This is particularly telling. It's also particularly telling in light of Iran being one of the countries with the highest instances of the coronavirus, and what that means in terms of access to state services, in terms of testing, and also in terms of hospitalisation and services by the state. So what the action here for Council to consider is for us to write to the Federal Minister as an act of solidarity in relation to members of our Baha'i community who have many networks and contacts and relatives in Iran, to write to the Foreign Minister requesting that the Iranian government reconsiders what it's doing to the Baha'i community.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I really commend Councillor Greco for bringing this notice of motion to us. So this is a change that happened recently where now in Iran you can't have other religions on your national identity card unless you are Zoroastrian, Jew, a Jewish person or a Christian. So what that means is that Baha'i are, as Councillor Greco was saying, they're unable to apply for an identity card. I think any situation where religions are being suppressed or not able to have the human right that they have to express their religion, I think is a really dangerous situation. We've seen it with people like the Rohingya in Myanmar and other situations where this is pretty much always a pretty terrible thing. So yeah, I really echo the calls. I know we do have a lot of Baha'i in Darebin. I've been to a lot of their celebrations. They're a very wonderful and peaceful group. And I've always enjoyed my time going to their events. I also really respect the democracy of the religion, the way that they don't have priests, but they rather have anyone from the congregation speaking to particular items. It's a religion that I respect a lot, and I'm very pleased to support Councillor Greco's calls and DEC's calls to express solidarity with this community and write to the Federal Minister.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to the end of notices motion. We'll just get Councillor Amir back in the room.
Another motion. I'm not sure what the status of that motion is. It's a motion that I submitted and I haven't received a response in regards to whether the motion was going to be included in the agenda or not included in the agenda.
I'll refer that to Ms Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, that was formally rejected via email last week.
I understand that it was formally rejected. I then wrote to the CEO and then I'm not sure whether there was a response in regards to whether the reasons that I given of why it should not have been rejected were going to...
So what I would say is I think that's a discussion that will need to be taken up outside of the meeting. You've acknowledged that you did understand that it was formally rejected, so on that basis it hasn't been included in this council agenda.
It hasn't been?
No, because it was formally rejected and you acknowledged that you understood from the CEO's communication that it had been formally rejected. So
No, I think you're misinterpreting what I'm saying, Mayor. I received an email saying that it had been rejected and then I had 24 hours to respond. I did respond within the 24 hours and then I never heard after that.
Look,
so that's why I'm wondering whether it was going to be included or what that's why I said what the status of it was.
Okay,
yes.
Clearly it hasn't been included. I'll have to actually ask that you take the discussion about the status and whether you wish to work with the CEO to submit it for the next meeting because it hasn't been included in this agenda and therefore will not be discussed tonight. So I would recommend that discussion take place with the CEO in relation to any desire you may have to further that notice of motion. So we'll move on into reports of standing committees. There are none. Records of assemblies of councillors.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. All those in favour? That is carried. Reports by Mayor and councillors. Moved by Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor Amir. All those in favour? Consideration of reports considered confidential. There are none. So that brings us to the close of the meeting. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Keith for staying till the end. Good evening, everyone.
Council's been sacked. Yeah, I heard that.